Evolution does not follow one simple straight line. There are several paths an organism can take, and eventually split off into different species based on a variety of internal and external factors. Given the fact that the majority of all life that has ever lived is forever gone, it's not surprising that many of these evolutionary lines end up being dead ends. In the case of Ace Combat Assault Horizon, it can be argued that it being a product of its time is ultimately what led to its extinction. However, the fossil record tells a slightly more complex story. To begin with, the first appearance of the Ace Combat genus and its oldest ancestor in the fossil record can be traced as far back as 1995 of the Common Era. There was some debate in the beginning of whether the species should be called Ace Combat or Air Combat in the West. But by the time more fossilized evidence of its successor, Ace Combat 2, were discovered, Ace Combat became the generally accepted name for the species. Paleontologists have come to categorize the period between 1995 and 2000 as the Namco era, with three distinct descendants that consist of Air Combat, Ace Combat 2, and Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere. The reason for calling it the Namco era is because at this point, genetically, the Ace Combat games only had Namco as the developers. This would soon change upon the discovery of Ace Combat 4 Shattered Skies in 2001, and with it marked the beginning of the Project Aces era. Ace Combat 4 was the first to appear on the new PlayStation 2 ecosystem, where it thrived, being a part of the most successful gaming console of all time, and with it, access to a large potential player base. The game also brought with it improved graphics, story, and gameplay. While its ancestors enjoyed mild success in their native Sony PlayStation habitat, Ace Combat 4 quickly became the most dominant and successful of its evolutionary line, with the later releases of Ace Combat 5 The Unsung War in 2004, and its spin-off prequel Ace Combat Zero The Balkan War in 2006. This is what's generally considered by many scholars and researchers as Ace Combat's golden era, and with some even categorizing the three as the Holy Trinity. However, not long after this, Ace Combat's native habitat underwent a drastic change. The next in the evolutionary line was displaced from its native Sony PlayStation home, and Ace Combat 6 Fires of Liberation found itself in the alien ecosystem of the Xbox 360. While the Xbox 360 did outsell the PlayStation 3 for most of the 7 console generation, the majority of Ace Combat players were still on the PlayStation, which thus limited Ace Combat 6's ability to thrive. As a result, despite AC6's impressive biological traits that it had acquired from its ancestors, it was left unable to adapt to the new world it found itself in. At the time, Xbox was the land of Gears of War and Halo, two properties that the Xbox was well known for, and in 2007, both were in their prime. This left Ace Combat 6 with little to work with. As a result, it became the worst mainline title on console, and its legacy is perhaps the most tragic in the evolutionary line, considering how good it actually was. It was the first in the series to have online multiplayer, graphics that were the best that they had ever been at the time, and its gameplay was also an improvement. But not many played it. Ace Combat essentially turned into an endangered species, and the series fell into a decade-long dark age. There were no more numbered games in the mainline series found in the fossil record during this period. Some of the subspecies on handheld and iOS devices did come into the scene at this time, none of which, however, were able to stand out like the games that were previously released on the PlayStation 2. And it's during this period when the strangest variant of the species was discovered. Ace Combat Assault Horizon was released in 2011, and it quickly became the subject of debate among gamer paleontologists. Some argued that it was in fact an Ace Combat game, while others disputed this and compared it to something like the whale shark, which is not actually a whale, or how some non-venomous species of snakes mimic the colors of actual venomous snakes to deter any predators. The reason for this debate is because, as far as console games go, Assault Horizon is the only game that did not take place in the fictional world of Strange Rail, but in the actual real world. Thematically and aesthetically, it also came across as trying to appeal to the Call of Duty player base. Its music, also a departure from the norm. It also lost its large-scale mission battles, and instead settled for slightly more grounded area combat. Players couldn't even attack a naval fleet however they wanted, like they did in previous games. Along with this, Assault Horizon also lost much of its flexibility. It often came across less like an arcade flight simulator and more like a rail shooter with near-endless quick-time-like events, since the game often actively forced the player to use its dogfighting mode, and in many cases it was the only way to shoot down enemy targets. Essentially, in every mission with the jet fighter, you can be sure that the game would hold the player's hand through its dogfighting mode in order to constantly deliver scripted cinematic moments. There was no escaping it, and it couldn't even be disabled in the settings menu. There was also only a small selection of planes that were made available per mission in the regular campaign mode. Even after completing the campaign, in the New Game Plus mode, players were not allowed to use whatever planes they wanted in most missions. Then there were the additions of non-fighter jet missions. These consisted of 2 missions as a helicopter machine gunner, 2 missions as an Apache attack helicopter, 1 bomber mission, and 1 AC-130 mission. Much of this seemed to be evolutionary attempts to appeal to players who also enjoyed modern first-person shooters of the time. This can be seen when looking at certain visuals and locations that appear similar to Call of Duty levels, but just from the aerial perspective. Most evidence of this can be seen with its AC-130 mission. With such notable drawbacks to Assault Horizon, it might be puzzling to wonder how it managed to survive for any period of time, long or short. The fossil record does, however, show some advantages the one-hit wonder may have benefited from. The first is its online multiplayer. While not necessarily all that superior to its ancestor, it was enough to satisfy the itch for some players, at least for a time. And there was also the addition of online co-op missions, along with the ability to customize the colors of your plane. At first glance into the fossil record, one might be given the impression that Assault Horizon was in fact a superior game to Ace Combat 6, since it did end up selling more copies. This, however, is not entirely accurate. While it did sell more copies, this was in large part because it was sold on the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and later Steam, whereas Ace Combat 6 was landlocked on the Xbox 360. In the end, Assault Horizon became barely a footnote in the fossil record, an evolutionary dead end, with its unique dogfighting mode largely forgotten. It was also around this time that there was a massive die-off of games that emphasized heavily on quick-time events, known as the QTE mass extinction. And for almost an entire decade, Ace Combat became even more of an endangered species. There were some more subspecies on other devices, but again, none that stood out. There was also Ace Combat Infinity, a free-to-play online game. Unfortunately, free-to-play games don't fossilize all that well, and it can practically be impossible to find any evidence of them after they've been killed off by developers and publishers. It wasn't until 2019 when Ace Combat 7 Skies Unknown brought the series back to life. Not only did it return the series to form, but it also became the most successful, surpassing even Ace Combat 4. While Assault Horizon is largely forgotten, some of its DNA can be found in AC-7's use of skills and custom parts that players can equip on their planes in the campaign as well as in multiplayer. While some of the few who know of Assault Horizon's existence may be quick to label it as the black sheep distant relative to the more successful Ace Combat evolutionary line, it nevertheless still deserves some credit. Despite its failure, Assault Horizon was brave enough to try something new and experiment with new ideas. And Project Aces deserves credit for acknowledging their mistakes and returning the series to form with Ace Combat 7, instead of being like other developers who seem to double down and going against what their fans want. Assault Horizon may have been an evolutionary dead end, never to be seen again, but to the few who remember their brief time with it, they do so with a slight smile on their face. This has been Mobile Suit K9, signing off.